If you've ever wanted to feel the pulse of history mixed with sport, this story is for you. Right now, as you listen, you're about to experience real English, simple, natural, full of life, through a vivid moment in time. Join us as we step into a surprising scene. A boy walks into the FIFA Club World Cup final and finds Donald Trump there. Subscribe, like, and share if you're ready to learn English through real events and strong stories. Thomas had always loved football. It wasn't just the game, but the energy, the uncertainty, the crowd. So when news came that the FIFA Club World Cup final would take place at MetLife Stadium near New York, he booked the trip. He wasn't American. He wasn't a Chelsea or PSG fan. But he knew this was his chance to witness something real and unexpected. When match day arrived, Thomas walked through the gates early, wearing a plain blue jacket, a match ticket, and a notebook. The sun was hot despite the stadium's roof shadow. The air buzzed with excitement. Flags from dozens of countries snapped in the breeze. He found his seat near the sidelines and watched as teams warmed up, Chelsea in blue, PSG in white. But what he didn't expect was the crowd behind the VIP box amid business leaders, football legends, and world leaders. Donald Trump. He stood tall, flanked by security, smiling and watching the players. For many, his presence was controversial. For Thomas, it was surreal. During the national anthem, Trump appeared briefly on the jumbo screen. A wave of boos erupted. Some fans chanted USA, others a boo. The tension crackled in the air. But Trump stayed composed, clapping, nodding. He had predicted the match would be an upset if Chelsea beat PSG. Chelsea would go on to win 3-0. Thomas leaned forward, pen ready in his notebook. He wrote, "A man with power in a stadium full of strangers." He didn't judge. He just watched. He watched as Trump presented medals and the trophy to Chelsea captain Reece James, even as boos echoed through the stands. Security forced Trump off stage when Chelsea lifted the trophy. He lingered too long, some said. That moment was messy, awkward. It drew criticism online, applause too, and added to Thomas's feeling that he wasn't just attending a football match. He was witnessing drama in real time. As the crowd filed out, Thomas stayed seated. The sun was low now, casting long shadows across the pitch. He closed his notebook. He didn't write a conclusion. He just looked at the empty field and the empty box seats across the way, Trump's suite still silent, waiting for what would come next. In his mind, he replayed the whistles, the boos, the unexpected presence. The match ended. Chelsea celebrated. Of all the memories, the spectacle of a president in the VIP box lingered strongest. He left the stadium slowly. Booksellers outside packed up club scarves. Vendors cleaned up plastic cups. The world moved on. But Thomas carried something new inside him, an awareness that sport and politics can collide, and when they do, language, silence, and subtle observation become tools to understand it all. As the first half of the match unfolded, Thomas felt like he was trapped between two worlds. One was the game, the rhythm of passes, tackles, chants, and cheers. The other was the strange political theater that had appeared just a few rows in front of him. The man sitting beside Thomas, a Colombian father in his 40s, nudged him and whispered, "You see him?" Then, without waiting for a reply, he added, "I didn't think he'd actually come." Thomas gave a polite smile. He didn't want to talk too much. He preferred watching, absorbing, storing moments for later. He noticed that Trump's box was surrounded by at least a dozen men in dark suits, earpieces in their ears. Most of them didn't even watch the game. Their eyes were scanning, alert, focused. What struck Thomas most wasn't the presence of security, it was the divided attention of the crowd. Some people ignored the former president entirely, focusing only on the football. Others took photos constantly, zooming in on the box. A few even tried to shout toward him. Most of the shouting wasn't polite. Near the 15th minute, a group behind Thomas stood up holding small banners, "Football, not politics." A few rose to the left, others shouted for more years. It was wild, loud, chaotic. The game went on. Players sprinted, dribbled, argued with the referee. But in the stands, it was like a second match had begun. A silent whir of stares and whispers. Thomas reached for his notebook again. He didn't write sentences this time, just words. Observations. Phrases that came to his mind like flashes. Power in the wrong place. Eyes on the box, not the ball. Football is never just football. He closed the notebook again and looked up just in time to see Chelsea score their first goal. The crowd erupted. Blue smoke rose from the far side of the stands. The announcer shouted the goal scorer's name with joy. But even in that joyful moment, something odd happened. A group in Trump's box stood and applauded. It wasn't clear if they were celebrating the goal or if it was just a coincidence. People booed them instantly. Thomas began to feel like he was watching not a match, but a symbol. The way people reacted to Trump's presence said more about their world than about football. For some, he was a powerful leader. For others, a symbol of division. For a few, simply a distraction. At halftime, Thomas left his seat and walked slowly around the outer ring of the stadium. He wanted to feel the mood from different sides. At one point, he passed a large group gathered near a concession stand. They weren't in line for food. They were watching a live screen where a commentator was talking about Trump's appearance. It was like politics had crashed the party and no one knew what to do. A young woman in a PSG jersey muttered, "He always finds a way to be in the center of everything." Her friend answered, "He's not even the president anymore." Thomas returned to his seat for the second half. The match had resumed. Chelsea now controlled the game with confidence and PSG seemed shaken. But the air in the stadium had changed. More people were watching the VIP box than the ball. More phones were pointed at Trump than at the players. Thomas tried to refocus. He looked down at the grass, at the players' movements, at the bright lines of the field. For a moment, he let himself forget the noise and the cameras. He watched the game like a child again. But it didn't last. At the 75th minute, Chelsea scored their second goal, and the moment was immediately followed by a surge of boos. Not against the team. Against the camera. The big screen had once again shown Trump clapping slowly, arms crossed, a slight smile on his face. It felt like the stadium groaned. Then came the third goal, sealed the game. PSG's players looked defeated. Fans began leaving early. But Thomas stayed. He wanted to see what would happen when the final whistle blew. And what happened surprised him. As the winning team lined up to receive their medals, Trump walked toward the stage. It was clear he was part of the medal ceremony. Some clapped. Others shouted. But what shocked Thomas was that Trump handed the trophy to the Chelsea captain himself. For a moment all eyes froze. Cameras flashed. The captain nodded politely but avoided eye contact. Thomas stood. Not to take a photo, but because he felt the tension so strongly he couldn't sit still. The crowd was louder than ever, not in celebration, but in reaction. Then, just a minute later, the moment ended awkwardly. A member of the organizing committee walked quickly toward Trump, whispered something in his ear, and gently motioned him to step away from the platform. Trump hesitated, then turned and walked off slowly, as if unaware of any disturbance. The cheers that followed were not for him, they were for the players lifting the trophy. Thomas sat back down and wrote again in his notebook. Trophies, politics, and blurred lines. The ball doesn't lie, but cameras do. Even silence is a message. When the ceremony ended, people began to leave quickly. The stadium emptied faster than Thomas expected. Maybe it was the late hour. Maybe people were uncomfortable. Maybe the game had given them more questions than answers. As Thomas walked out through Gate 5, he looked back one last time. The field was now empty. Workers picked up streamers. Loudspeakers played soft music. But for Thomas, the real noise was inside his head. He had come for football. He had found something else. He walked alone to the subway station, the night wind brushing against his face. The blue lights of the stadium behind him faded. And still, he couldn't stop thinking. How did we get here? Why do our games become stages for power? And what will happen the next time? Thomas stared at his hotel ceiling long after midnight, his thoughts still looping through the match, the crowd, and the strange aftertaste of it all. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was filled with blurry images, stadium lights, flashing cameras, voices shouting things he couldn't understand. He woke up before sunrise, confused by the silence of the city outside. The contrast from the roaring stadium felt unreal. He stood by the window and looked out over the skyline of New Jersey, soft fog hugging the rooftops like a quiet curtain after a chaotic play. Later that morning, he walked into a small cafe 2 blocks from his hotel. The barista greeted him with a casual, "Wild night, huh?" Thomas nodded. On the wall above the counter, a flat screen was replaying highlights of the final match. But instead of focusing on Chelsea's strategy or PSG's mistakes, the news was zooming in on the moment Donald Trump appeared on screen, waving awkwardly from the VIP box. Thomas sipped his coffee and listened as 2 men behind him argued. "He had no reason to be there," said one. "Oh, why not?" "He's a former president," the other replied. "This is a global stage." Exactly. That's the problem. It should have been about the game." Thomas quietly pulled out his notebook and jotted down that sentence. It should have been about the game. As he walked around the city that afternoon, he noticed how the match had spilled beyond the stadium. Billboards showed images of the trophy lift, but almost every social media post he saw focused on the political tension, not the final score. In a bookstore, a front-page newspaper headline read, "A night of goals and ghosts when football meets politics." The article discussed how Trump's presence was unofficial, unannounced, and yet somehow unavoidable. Some fans claimed it was a publicity stunt. Others argued it was part of a long strategy to re-enter the spotlight. Thomas wasn't sure what to believe. He wasn't interested in conspiracy theories or media spin. He was more fascinated by the psychology of the moment. Why had the crowd reacted the way it did? Why had even the happiest moments of the match felt so tense, so loaded? He remembered the Chelsea captain lifting the trophy with a hesitant smile. He had received the trophy, yes, but not from a sports official or a club legend or even a FIFA representative. From a man who had once held nuclear codes. That moment, brief, awkward, irreversible, would now live online forever. In the evening, Thomas sat in Central Park, even though it was cold. He needed space to think. Around him, joggers passed quietly, and a musician strummed a guitar softly near a bench. Thomas opened his notebook again. This time he wrote slower, more thoughtfully. "I came here for a final. I witnessed something else. Something bigger. Something heavier. The game was played on the grass, but the story was written in the stands. He paused, thinking of how divided the reactions were, how football, once a unifier, had become another place where the world argued about power, truth, and belonging. He remembered how kids in the crowd looked confused when people booed. How parents tried to explain the situation without saying too much. How even the chants changed, not just club songs, but political slogans, sometimes in different languages, echoing around the concrete stadium like ghosts of past debates. And in all of it, Thomas remained a quiet observer, watching how meaning shifted depending on who was looking. For one person, it was a proud moment. For another, it was disrespectful. For Thomas, it was a question: what happens to simple joy when the world keeps interrupting? That night, back in his room, he connected his phone to the hotel Wi-Fi and scrolled through global headlines. In Brazil, football hijacked by politics? In France, PSG fans protest Trump appearance at club final? In England, Trump hands trophy at global final, sparks controversy. In Germany, Trump's surprise presence dominates Club World Cup coverage. Every article had a slightly different tone. Some praised, some condemned, some simply described. But all of them agreed on one thing: no one had expected that moment. And no one could ignore it. Thomas realized something else, too: how many English expressions he had read and understood that he didn't even know last year. Dominates coverage. A hijacked the narrative. A backlash. Polarizing presence. These were real expressions, not from a textbook, but from life itself. And that was the strange beauty of it all. He had traveled for football. He had improved his English. And he had learned about the world, all at once. Before going to bed, Thomas wrote one last note. Language lives in moments. Real ones. Chaotic, emotional, confusing. That's where we understand it, not in rules, but in meaning. Then he closed his notebook and stared at the city lights. He didn't feel angry or confused anymore. Just aware. Aware of how events overlap, how stories surprise us, and how sometimes, one night can teach you more than a semester in school. And for Thomas, that night in the stadium was unforgettable, not just for the goals, but for what he learned by watching, listening, and thinking in a language he had once feared. And guess what? While you were following Thomas through that unforgettable night, watching the match, the crowd, the tension, and the reflections after, you weren't just listening to a story. You were learning English. Seriously. You picked up new words without studying them. You understood real expressions without translation. You felt grammar instead of memorizing it. That's the power of storytelling. You learn naturally, with emotion, with imagination, and with meaning. And here's the best part: we do this every single day. One story. One adventure. One step closer to English fluency, without boring lessons, without pressure. So if you enjoyed this story even just a little, do these 3 things now. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss tomorrow's story. Like the video if you felt something while listening. And leave a comment below: what would you have done if you were sitting next to Thomas at the stadium? We read every comment. We might even turn one into a future story. See you tomorrow. New day. New place. New adventure. Keep learning the fun way.